Well, let's begin. Looks like we have our large crowd again, and I want to thank everybody for showing up at the Open-E webinar that we have currently today. Before I begin, usually I'd like to let you know that if you have any questions, just let me know, or chat if you're not able to see anything on your screen, and I'll make some adjustments. Well, again, thank you very much for showing up at the Open-E webinar. Today's topic is going to be remote console access, how to access the console screen remotely. We get a lot of these questions, and we wanted to provide this webinar based on, we've seen a lot of questions coming in, where do I have to go to the server? And this feature that DSS provides with the remote console access really eliminates a lot of effort for engineers to walk to the data center or be able to access to the console screen, which is very important for deeper functions. So we wanted to provide this video to be able to show you very quickly the importance of it and how easy it is to access the console screen in DSS V6. So the topics we're going to go over is why is it important to set up the remote console access, and then set up the DSS V6. We'll show you how to go through that, checking the console access, making sure some of the parameters that you have are correct. And then what we'll do is we'll configure the PuTTY program, though you can use this in Linux and Mac OS systems, and for PuTTY and also directly for SSH. And then we're going to authenticate with the default username and assigned passwords that we can use. And of course, at the end, we can talk about troubleshooting your connection if you're not able to connect to the remote console access. Well, again, today is May 3rd, 2011. My name is Todd Maxwell with the Open-E Technical Sales, and along with me is Chris Wilson, part of the Open-E sales team. I like to keep my PowerPoints very short because I like to go right into the GUI, as many as you know. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you is that you really typically you have two scenarios here, either a LAN or a WAN environment. And what you want to prevent is you have the PC and you don't really want to walk over any distance to physically actually get to the Open-E DSS server, because it could be at a headless state where you don't need a keyboard or a mouse or a video or monitor for that fact connected to the video connection to the DSS server. So you want to be able to remotely access it via a remote console access. And of course you have the WAN capabilities. Obviously, if you have the system or the data server remotely, you want to get access to it. This is another important reason why you want to have the remote console access. Now, the default port that we set for most of your firewalls and for you to enable the access via SSH is going to be port 22,222. You can use other ports, anywhere between the ranges of 1024 through 65,535 range. You cannot use indicated ports that are already used. So bear that in mind. If you're using a port that's already in use, let's say 22,224, it's already used, please don't use it. So you want to probably do a port scanner and verify that. Another important thing I see a lot that we're seeing is that engineers and end users don't have some type of keyboard or video or a mouse component, whether it be just directly connected to an offsite PC off to the side to be able to access the BIOS of the motherboard when the system boots up, or some type of, like Supermicro has, IPMI, or any other access to be able to gain to the BIOS of the server. Why is this important? Well, let's say if you had some hardware issue and you're trying to diagnose the issue that possibly could be from a RAID controller. So after the power on self-test, you might want to be able to access the RAID controller and perform some type of RAID health check. And also to be able to gain access to be able to change settings in the BIOS for your testing. So it really saves a lot of time, especially for you guys out in the field that really don't have time to go walk across the street or walk across to the server room that may be several floors up, or even through a WAN, wide area network, that you just don't have time to even get to somebody and make a phone call. They might be out on lunch, and so this is important to go over this. This is the last part of the video. Pretty much these are all standards, but I just want to let everybody know the webinars are recorded. And you will find all the demos and recorded webinars at the page right under the link below, where it's at www.open-e.com, library, webcast, and demos. Presentation is muted. That's to avoid background noise, and so you can listen to me. And on the right side of the net viewer, you'll see a chat window where you can submit a question near the end, and I'll be happy to answer all your questions. Thanks again for the PowerPoint presentation. As we go right into the actual demonstration of the DSS V6 with remote console access, please check our webpage for the next date and times for the next planned webinars. So let's begin. What we'll do is go ahead and go right into our DSS server. You know, so right here we've got, want to keep the IP address right up here for everyone to see. The default for DSS V6 is always 192.168.0.20. So if you deploy many of these systems, keep in mind that if they are going to be, let's say, the last octet of 220, or even 0.220 for the default IP address, make sure that your firewall is pointing to that IP address to have that port 22,222 default enabled. And keep in mind, you can change it. And one of the first things we want to do is go into the setup tool. And if you need to change the IP address, you can easily do that in setup network interfaces. You want to be able to make sure that you see your Ethernet NICs right here on the left. And by default, ETH0 will always be the 192.168.0.220. And of course, if you need outside access, then you're going to have to put a gateway to be able to get outside if, of course, you're in a WAN. So you can change this, but make sure that it reflects onto your firewall, so at least when you do some type of port forwarding, that it will forward that SSH port that you've chosen for the DSS V6 to be able to access it via the console. Now, once you're set with your IP address and you've confirmed your port firewalls for your WAN that are open and they're NATed to that specific IP address, what we need to do is go to Setup and then Administrator. And we want to scroll all the way down to where you see Remote Console Access. You can click right here. It says Remote Console Access. Now, I already put some preset numbers in here, the IP addresses. You don't have to. If I were to leave this blank, that means any IP address on that network that you can see the DSS V6, that you can access the remote console or the console screen for all those console screen functions. Now, one of the other things that I want to point is that when you do add multiple IP addresses, you see, if you notice, I got a semicolon. So you can add many or even use a subnet mask. So here you can even add another IP address, even a 10.x network. So you can add those IP addresses as well. So for security reasons, you might want to add only specific IP addresses for certain systems. But be careful, if you're on a DHCP network and it happens to release all those IP addresses, it may affect you. So you may want to have some static IP addresses set aside specifically for the remote console access. Now, by default, we set it to port 22,222. But if you have many DSS V6s in the environment and you are using it in a WAN and you're connecting and you do need to set the firewall to set your port forwarding to these specific IP addresses. So maybe on one DSS server you may have port 22,224 and so forth and so forth, and then have those reflect on the firewall. So for now, we'll just leave this on to the default. Now, when you set the password, so we do recommend you use strong passwords, and you need a minimum of 5 characters. So you can add more than 5, but the minimum is 5. On the older products of DSS V5 and even the NAS R3, it was set to a minimum of 8 characters. But with the DSS V6, we have many that ask for 5 characters is enough. And also there is some special characters that we cannot accept. And I'm going to go over that in just a second. You will have to also confirm it as well. Once you do this, you hit apply, and we're pretty much ready to go. I want to point to everybody about the question marks here. And typically in all the functions that we have specifically for each feature of the DSS V6, this little question mark provides a lot of information. So you can see more information of pretty much what we've talked about the port ranges, and here are the special characters that I wanted to mention. So please brief yourself on these before entering if you're having difficulties using any special characters, because we're not able to use them. And if you're using a Linux or a Mac OS X system, we also provide information of how to connect via the SSH protocol. And the username that we have, I want to point this out, up here we state it, is CLI. Down here we state it CLI. Many ask about this and they're not able to see it. And if you don't have time to read, this video will help many that when you log in, you want to use CLI, basically meaning for command line interface. Now, here is the settings for Microsoft Windows. We can download the PuTTY version. Right here, if you click on PuTTY, and here it takes you right to the PuTTY site, and we can scroll down or click on the download button here. And this will typically take you right down to the different binaries for Windows x86 systems. So here you could download the PuTTY exe and beginning running it. Okay. So now we have, let's close this window out. And let's make sure that everyone's able to see it. Let's bring this to a little bit better clarity. There we go. Now, I can't get this any larger because PuTTY doesn't expand typically like any other applications that would be larger. One of the first things we want to do is remember we're going to use the default IP address. You can change it. Let's go ahead and set that in. So we have 192.168.0.220. And remember, the default port is 22,222. So really 5 twos. Make sure that you set it for SSH. And what we'll do is we'll just save a name here, DSS V6. And then, of course, we'll save it. Now, what is very important is, and it's also documented on the notes, is that you want to be able to go to the terminal and keyboard and select VT100+, because when you start using the Control-Alt-X or T commands in conjunction, you'll have difficulty getting in. So once you set this, we can go right back into our session. And now that we have DSS V6 loaded, we're ready to open it up. And here we see that it's asking for the login. Let's see if we can make this a little bit open up. Let's see if we can make it larger. We'll leave it for right now. But CLI is what I'm going to enter. Now I'm going to enter my 5-character password. And now you can see I'm actually into the console. So this saves time from walking up to the DSS V6 if it was on a WAN or a LAN or even a data center or a server room and you're far away and you don't have time to actually access the system. Now some of the cases is we've seen cases where people say they're not able to access the console screen. What could some of the areas be? One is you may have some restrictions. Maybe the firewall is blocking that SSH port. Maybe you don't have the SSH port set up in the firewall. So make sure you have your port forwarding set up. Another issue that we've seen is that in the logs of DSS V6, you go into status and into hardware. And if you scroll down, right down here where it says logs, and you download the log file, there is a file called test.log. Now, just to shorten this up so we don't have to wait for the video, the log to download and, of course, expand the logs, what I've done is I copied it. Sometimes you may have issues with connectivity issues that are related to the network environment. We have seen in some cases that there might be what's called jiffy errors, or there might be some port issues on the switch. There could be some issues with bad packets. Here's a case that we found out the end user could not connect. He would connect, but then all of a sudden he would just drop off. Once we obtained the logs and we found out that he was receiving bad packets, and something were in a switch or in somewhere coming back to him from the server end, actually the connectivity to the server created some bad packets from the end user who was doing the SSH. So here you'll see that there was some dropped packets, and that would cause him to log in but then automatically drop out. Another case could be where you would have TX, which means packets going out, where there'd be a lot of large drop packets, and maybe there's issues from the server, the DSS side. Maybe the network cable is defective. Maybe there is a problem with the NIC on the DSS that needs to be looked after. And then, of course, you have drop packets. So that could happen as well, as where you're not able to sustain a connection with the remote console access. Okay, so let's go back to the console screen. I want to point out something here. If we do a Control-Alt-T for tools, you can see where you can verify ping. So let's say you do an installation in the beginning. You want to verify that the DSS, before you go back to your desk or before you connect your notebook up to the network to be able to access the GUI of the DSS, you probably want to do a ping first. So the Control-Alt-T allows you to do certain console tool functions. So we just take a basic ping function, and you want to ping your firewall or gateway. What you would do is you just enter the IP address and verify that you are getting a ping request back. So here you can see that you are getting ping requests, and of course you'll be able to see your time to live and variables and your time in milliseconds. You can also ping different IP addresses on the network. Maybe you have multiple NICs and you want to be able to communicate to a different network address. You can also enter those as well. Now, if you just started to install DSS V6 and you're at the console and you're about ready, you can also verify if you have any possible drop packets, such as what we just talked about in the logs. I want to bring your attention to, once you're in the console screen, what's valuable is if you hit F1 and you see these commands, Control-Alt-N, Control-Alt-I, there's many of them, that's where that VT100 Plus will come into play if you don't set it right for, let's say, PuTTY session. So let's go back and let's look at Control-Alt-N for network. So we want to verify if we have any bad packets. That way you know that when you run back to your desktop or your station there, that you can go ahead and know that you should be able to connect freely without any network issues. So let's take a look at ETH0, the first one. And we see this apply button right here. We want to be able to use the cursor keys or the tab keys to maneuver around. So let's look at the apply button. The info button that we're going to use. And here's the information that you can see. You can look right here for this Intel GigE NIC that we have, that there's no drop packets on the RX side or the TX side. So that way we should be clean to be able to use the SSH for PuTTY. You can also verify that for each of the NICs that you have. So if you wanted to verify ETH1 as well, you can tell that the cable is running. Let's go back and take a look at that. So before you start the GUI, you see on the right side here where my mouse arrow is, both of these are running. These do not have cables connected. You can also set the default gateway to save time so you don't have to enter that from the GUI as well. So when you go to ETH1, then we want to be able to go to info, and there in info, we see there's no drop packets either on the RX or TX side. Now, the reason that really we see a lot of engineers using the console is that in case you are having some hardware issues, we may need to access your system. What Open-E provides is in one of the beautiful functions that we provide inside DSS V6, and our Open-E support team is able to help you, is if you do Control-Alt-X for extended tools. Okay, now this is a deep function, so this is why we prompt you for the password. And by the way, the password is your GUI password. So here the default is admin. And here we have a very important tool that helps many of our customers and end users. that if there's a hardware issue, that we're able to help you diagnose where the problem might be and possibly be able to assist you in resolving the problem very quickly. If you notice that option number 5 down here, it states remote support. The remote support is very important to know, and this is another reason why you should have the remote console access. And the reason why I'm pointing out these things is they're very important to know that if you're a partner, you might want to learn this to share this with your customers. It's a very valuable tool that in case we need to schedule a remote support engineer to access your system, this is a tool that you definitely want to be able to connect to. And with the remote console access can help you assist this faster instead of you walking to another building. The service here, what it does is it connects to our service in the Open-E servers to allow our experts to fix the issues remotely. Now, what you need is obviously a ticket number that you have to submit a ticket. Once you submit that ticket, then we tell you can go ahead and use that ticket number to enter it into the field where we're going to in a few seconds. Now, you do need outbound access, so the DSS V6 will need a gateway to be able to get out to the outside world and be able to have some connectivity. So, once again, use the ping tool to verify that you can ping to the outside world. Once you do this, you want to make sure also that your firewall or gateway is not blocking the TCP outgoing port of 65,500. So make sure that we've seen that has been disabled, and we only need the outbound access. We don't need the inbound access, because what we're doing is we're creating an SSH encrypted connection. It's almost like a phone home service. Well, once you say OK on this, the remote support, do you want to continue? Yes. And then, of course, we will give you a ticket number of 101XX whatever. And then you can put a short description, need help for my RAID controller. And what this will do is verify that you can get to the outside internet. Remember, we set our gateway, so we are able to ping to the gateways, which allows us to get to the outside internet through the firewall as well. And then once you have all that set, you enter the proper ticket number. It'll state remote support is activated. And at this point, you say OK. And what this will take you back to the main screen. You will see a notice right here on the bottom where it states, notice remote support services connected. And this verifies that we will see what happens at this process is that engineers will see you connected, and then of course they'll reference to the ticket to verify what needs to be done and what needs to be fixed or corrected or looked into. So it's very helpful, as you can see, what we need to do to have you have remote console access. If you ever need to turn it off, because once we're done, typically the engineer will disconnect the service. If you find that, and many times we do see, if you leave the service on over the weekend, some connectivities do get dropped. If you see that it's still stating and you need to disconnect it for whatever reason, because of maybe you're on the weekend, you want to test some things, you can always go back. We go back into the extended tools, which is Control-Alt-X, enter the default GUI password or your password that you've created. You can go right back into remote support. And here you say, it states that remote support is already active. Do you want to deactivate the service? And we'll state yes, and it'll verify that the remote support is deactivated. If you notice that there's a lot of things you can do here, we really warn many different variables here that if you were to have somebody access the remote console, they're able to use the GUI password to get into the deeper functions. Please be careful giving this information out. There can be a case where if somebody in your company does have the passwords, does have the remote console password to be able to access through SSH, they can actually get inside to the point where if they know the default admin or the full access password, they can get in and they can wipe out the data. So what do we recommend in this case? For a real secured environment, make your passwords longer than 5 characters. Create also policies so to prevent users. So if you do have an IP address that is set up with the DSS V6, make sure that you change that in case that employee or whoever remains, for whatever security reasons, to change those IP addresses. So if that user is 13, make sure that you change that, or be able to just disable the remote access console. Another way is you can also lock console with password. So this would be the separate password to be able to disable and completely lock people from creating a separate password to lock people from getting to the console. The other concept would be to lock console without password, totally shutting it down so no one's able to access it, which provides total security in getting into the system. So at this point we have the defaults of unlock console. So these are some of the features that we really wanted to bring out to educate a lot of the engineers when they first set up the DSS V6 system. It's very important to, right after you do your product activation, actually you want to do it right when the DSS V6 is starting up, right here at console, and verify that you can ping, set, and check your pad packets. Make sure that's set, and then you'll be able to use the PuTTY utility that comes with right in from over Google or directly from our online help. And again, the reason why you want to be able to use the console screen, there's a lot of deeper tuning functions. In fact, you would Control Alt W. Once again, it's going to ask for the GUI password. And here in tuning options, it's very important that some of you may be wanting to change the jumbo frames, maybe do some NFS daemon tools, or what we see a lot is the iSCSI daemon options. So here you may want to change some target variables, iSCSI volume types, or even the iSCSI solutions. Additional information is at the LM sensors. So this allows us to test the system for and hardware options. If we wanted to find out what the temperature is for the fan, CPU, and other variables that are on the motherboard that are very important for your environment. We did have some cases where people didn't set that. Next thing you know, there's heat, and heat's building up in volumes. There was so much heat that the air conditioning went out, that the whole room was heating up in 90 to 100 and some odd degrees, where that was causing some adverse effects. So here you can test your different variables of LM sensors to get the outputs for your server. So for example, I just tested the LM sensors, and here let's go take a look at the GUI. And if we go to status, hardware, you can test to see if the LM sensors will work with your motherboard. So here it did not, and the reason why I'm doing this is showing you the difference of what you can do. We can go back into the sensors. We can try even motherboard monitor. Let's see if we can do that. It's called MBMON. And that did not work. You could try different ones. We can even try, let's see, IPMI sensors. And let's see if that took it. So my motherboard, so this is a way you can verify if your motherboard, you just have to test which one, but this is something else that you should set up before you start using your system in the production environment so you can get these variables. So it's important that you set these things up with the DSS V6 on the remote console.